The Chicago Bears are the favorites this week against the Houston Texans, and they don't need to do anything revolutionary. But I do think they have a real opportunity to open up their offense a little bit and show the rest of the NFL that they're a little bit separate from the bottom of the league, like Houston.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. Our episode today is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. On the show today, we put together a game plan for what the Chicago Bears need to do to beat the Houston Texans in Week 3 and advance to 2-1. We'll start with this Bears offense, all the talk about the need to pass more. And I think this matchup with the Texans should, in theory, provide some opportunity to do so. And we'll get into why I have a hunch that Justin Fields might be able to connect on a deep shot or two based on what we've been seeing so far from the Houston Texans defense. Well, I still think the Bears can, should, and will focus on running the ball still first and foremost. Then we'll turn our attention to this Texans offense, this Bears defense, and how the Bears should handle Jalen Mills and kind of where we should watch out and where I think the Bears should be okay. And we'll wrap up like we always do, getting into some of the key matchups in this game that I think will decide it. Some of the Texans' weaknesses that the Bears should attack, and some of the Texans' strengths that the Bears need to minimize and be most prepared for. But I think in this game, Justin Fields should have some opportunities to hit some passes downfield. Now, I'm not expecting that to mean 5 touchdowns, right? I don't think this is going to be a high-scoring game. The Bears are not going to completely abandon their running game, open it up, and just take nothing but shots downfield. But as we've seen the way Lovie Smith's defense has operated this season, I just have a feeling we'll see 1 or 2 of those really nice, accurate deep balls from Justin Fields. It might not even mean 300 yards from him. It might end still being a relatively pedestrian stat line, but I think it'll open some things up in a way that helps us feel a little bit better about how well-rounded this Bears offense can be. Because we think of the Chicago Bears Lovie Smith defense, right? Cover 2, Brian Urlacher, that Tampa 2 middle linebacker, 2 deep safeties, and it's the same type of coaching tree that the Matt Eberflus defense is coming from underneath. They are a similar style in a lot of ways. But Lovie has changed over the years, and what we see on the field may not perfectly match the reputation that so many of us are going to bring into this game. That when you look at, especially how they played against the Denver Broncos, who have Russell Wilson, compared to what the Bears have been doing with them offensively, the Texan strategy in this game, and it's been a trend in Lovie Smith's recent years, he's gone to a lot more single deep safety coverages. They'll still show you 2 deep safeties before the snap, but they've been prone to rotate a safety down a lot more. When you look back over the Texans game against the Broncos in particular, just because that's the most recent game, not that the Texans will instantly do the exact same thing against the Bears that they did against the Texans or against the Broncos, but it is a trend to watch that the Broncos' top coverages against the Texans' top coverages against the Broncos. Jeez, I'm getting these teams mixed up. Cover 1 and cover 3 represented more than 3/4 of the Texans' coverage snaps against the Broncos. That's single deep safety in both cases. One is man-to-man coverage. The other one is zone coverage. And so I think we should expect Justin Fields to get more single safeties looks, at least after the snap. They might show 2 safeties pre-snap, but quite often we're going to see them rotate to 1 deep safety. And what that does is it opens up more opportunity to take shots downfield up the seams. If you're going to cover 3, it'll be 3 deep zone defenders, 4 underneath zone defenders. And if you're in cover 1, it's the middle of the field deep zone and then man coverage underneath with sometimes another zone coverage right in the middle of the field there to try and take away the quick middle of the field stuff. But I think there should be some opportunities. Darnell Mooney, Equinemius St. Brown, Byron Pringle, go vertical from the slot position and really attack those seams. And in particular, whether you're in cover 3 or cover 1, the way most teams play it, your outside cornerbacks are more or less in man-to-man coverage for anything that goes vertical or to the outside. And so it becomes a majority of the game for your outside receivers basically having more like man coverage. And I think that's easier than for Justin Fields to be able to read and more space over top for him to be able to throw those balls downfield, assuming he has the time and space in the pocket to let those routes develop downfield and hit those throws, which is kind of a big but or a big if at this stage of the process. But I think you combine that trend that we're seeing coverage-wise in recent games for the Texans, along with the Bears' trend of being able to run the ball very, very effectively, and that the Texans may want to try and stop that running game by bringing that safety down into the box, right? So not only have they already been prone to 1 deep safety coverages, but I also think the Bears' ability to run the ball will lead the Texans to want to bring that other safety down even just as often, if not more often, into the box to try and stop that run. So it should all really build up this case towards, okay, 1 deep safety. Let's see if these guys can get open on the outside or if the Bears can attack the seams properly in this matchup. We also heard yesterday on the Crossover Thursday podcast with John Hickman and Cody Davis from Locked On Texans about how the Texans have struggled a little bit with like deep crossing routes and routes getting behind the zone, especially on play action, like we've seen the Bears struggle with. So I think there's room for them to hit those intermediate routes, crossing deep over the middle of the field or vertical up the seam or on the outside against a lot of those single coverages in man-to-man. And so I think the Bears, in theory, should still be able to run the ball okay, and then should be able to get shots going over top. And I think it makes for a nice formula for Justin Fields to have some downfield passing success. Again, not 4 touchdowns, not expecting a blowout. I'm not expecting the Bears to rack up a bunch of points. I think the Bears will still run the ball a lot. I think they'll still control the clock a lot and not be over the top in the offensive production. But I think there should be opportunities there for Justin Fields. And I'm excited to see how this comes together in this game plan. I think it'll be a little bit of a bounce back for this Bears offense. Curious to see how the Bears take the defensive approach in this game, given the struggles they had last week against Green Bay and at times against San Francisco. We'll look at what the Bears need to do against Davis Mills, and also their running back Damon Pierce is a threat to watch out of that backfield next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BriteCo, the ultimate jewelry insurance for you, because we've all seen those viral videos online, right, where someone's doing a proposal and they get down on the knee and the ring slips out and maybe they're on a dock and it falls into the ocean or it falls off the side of a cliff if it's a beautiful sight. And of course, you spent all that money on the ring is gone, and you're screwed and you're going viral. Well, our friends at BriteCo are here to help stop that from happening. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want it splattered all over the internet. The guys at BriteCo Jewelry Insurance make sure you get a replacement for the full value of not only that ring, but you can have your watches, your necklaces, all of your jewelry can be covered by BriteCo. No matter if it's lost, stolen, or you just can't figure out what happened to it, they've got you covered. Head on over to Brite.co/locked on. It's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to cover your butt with the best jewelry insurance in the business. That's BRITE.co/locked on. I would imagine the Houston Texans are going to try and stop the Bears running game and try and make Justin Fields beat them, which I think Justin Fields is more than capable of doing. But if I'm the Chicago Bears, I'm looking at the Texans offense and doing the same thing, right? I don't necessarily feel like Davis Mills can be that guy to throw the Texans to victory with 300 yards, consistently. I think he's had good games in the past, and I'm not saying he's a terrible quarterback that can't do anything of value, but he's been much more of a game manager, take care of the ball type guy, and the downfield accuracy has been limited this season. He's taking care of the ball, just not really hitting on the big plays. And so then if I'm the Bears, I'm saying, okay, make Davis Mills beat you. They started to get their running game going a little bit more consistently the last week, and they're still not rushing like a ton, but it does feel like Dameon Pierce has the individual ability to kind of get things rolling, and their offensive line is getting better, especially in the ground game. We talked yesterday with John and Cody from Locked On Texans, and they were saying how even though the Texans have a new left guard in there and their backup center, that both players have been better run blockers than the starting options they had been dealing with there. And they feel like that can help get Dameon Pierce going even more this week, especially as the Bears have looked vulnerable against the run. Obviously, I don't think Dameon Pierce is quite Aaron Jones yet, and I'm not sure that the Texans' offensive line is quite the Packers' offensive line yet, although the Packers had some injuries there as well that they were dealing with. But given the Bears' propensity to miss tackles and struggling to get out in space, I think the Texans are going to want to run the ball. And the Bears really, I think, need to hone in on trying to shut that down, being a lot more disciplined about getting contained on the outside, funneling those runs back inside, and when they do get back inside, wrapping up and making the tackles. And I think one of the emphasis points we've heard this week from the Bears coaching staff is about the Bears tackling more about how their linebackers and defensive backs and even defensive linemen, how their defensive players actually need to use their legs more in the tackle, which I think is a really interesting technique point that we don't always think about. That a lot of times it's because the Bears players might be leaving their feet a little bit too early, that you need to wrap up and keep driving your legs. Don't just, sort of leap to tackle him or leave your feet when you wrap around him, but like keep your feet on the ground and keep them moving. Like Alan Williams, the defensive coordinator, talked about Jaquan Brisker and his 4 missed tackles last week. And they said, we just want him to take an extra step or two on the tackle, that he's initiating the tackle and then kind of forgetting about his feet and just trying to, physically will the guy to the ground. And I think that can be the case in so many of these situations, not only with getting off and getting around blocks, but making these tackles across the board. Just keep the feet moving even more. And of course, getting lower on the tackles is part of it too. And taking the correct angles to get to the ball carrier is a part of it too. But I think the Bears have a good sense of what's going to be helpful for trying to get this tackling problem a little bit under control. That doesn't mean it's going to be completely solved, but I think it's a good way to sort of slow down that running game and then make Davis Mills beat you through the air. Because you look at this Texans cast of weapons. It's Brandon Cooks, yes, 1,000-yard receiver. You got to be worried about Brandon Cooks. And if I'm the Bears, we're going to get into all matchups here in just a little bit, but I would be tempted to just put Jalen Johnson on Brandon Cooks and shadow him. No matter where Brandon Cooks lines up, you're against him in coverage. Just don't let Brandon Cooks go on Kyler Gordon, because Gordon's kind of coming off of a game where he was taken advantage of a little bit. And I don't super trust Kindle Vildor. And if I'm going to make Davis Mills beat me, I'm going to make Brandon Cooks beat Jalen Johnson too, right? Because Davis Mills might be able to get one or two past a Kyler Gordon or a Kindle Vildor at this stage of their careers and of the season. And I don't want Brandon Cooks to be able to beat me. They got Nico Collins. He was their 3rd-round pick. Was it last year out of Michigan? And he's a decent player. He's not a dynamic, big-time playmaking threat just yet, but he can move the chains a little bit, and he's starting to build some of that trust with Mills. So I'm keeping an eye on that guy. He's not a nobody, but after Davis Mills, right, they're not threatening you a ton or after Brandon Cooks, they're not threatening you a ton with this set of weapons, and I feel better about the Bears secondary being able to keep up with everybody not named Brandon Cooks, and that's why I think if you could just shadow Jalen Johnson on him and really make him work for those completions, I'm not worried about the Nico Collinses of the world or O.J. Howard really necessarily dominating you. Howard has a couple of touchdowns. He's been a good red zone weapon for him, but he's got 3 catches for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's not been all the time tearing up opposing defenses all game long. So there's some potential there for some plays, but I feel pretty good outside of the Brandon Cooks matchup that Jalen Johnson should be able to take care of. And I think you combine that of slowing down the running game, making Davis Mills throw, I think you can get the pressure on him and put too much on his shoulders. And I think part of that too is playing with a lead, right? The Bears do need to start fast, make the Texans have to throw so that they can't just run the ball and be tied or close enough in score that they can take their time on these drives. Make Davis Mills feel like, oh crap, we need points on this drive. I got to score. I got to move. I got to hit this pass. Get in his head a little bit that way. And I think the Bears should be in a pretty good position to win this game. It's all about winning those one-on-one matchups. And we're going to go through, even beyond Cooks and Jalen Johnson, some of the other key matchups in this game that you might not be as familiar with some of the Texans players involved, but I think it's the matchups that are going to decide this ball game next on Locked On Bears. As you know, we here on the Locked On Podcast Network love our friends at BetOnline, your number one source for all of your sports betting needs. Across the board, they've got you covered, not only for this upcoming Bears game, where right now the Bears are 2.5-point favorites on BetOnline. You can get the over-under in there as well, and also an opportunity to get the money line going in a lot of different ways to win, not just on the Bears game, but of course the rest of the NFL. You've got college football season. You can bet on baseball season with the playoffs right around the corner. Plus, basketball coming up. You got soccer, tennis, hockey, boxing, all of the combat sports, esports, live betting in games as well is a ton of fun. So make sure you check out BetOnline for all your sports wagering information. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all the games and leagues. So head on over to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn all about the different trends and action you need to know. BetOnline, where the game starts. When I look at the top matchups in a game like this, for me, I look at the changes that the Houston Texans. I don't know why I cannot get this team straight today. It's because I was looking at Jerry Hughes of the defensive line, and I associate him with the Buffalo Bills where he used to play. But I want to start with the Texans offensive line. We mentioned it a little bit earlier. New left guard, rookie, first-round pick, rookie, but still rookie Kenyon Green, and they're in their backup center, David Quessenberry, because Justin Britt is away dealing with a personal matter of some kind and sort of a little bit murky on what exactly that's going to look like. But two new players on the interior, it's all about that communication. That was one of the things that David that Cody and John on yesterday's podcast, the Crossover Thursday, talk about how they feel like this offensive line has talent. It's just most of them didn't play in the preseason, or a chunk of them didn't play in the preseason. And so they're still getting used to each other, picking up stunts, communicating, passing off blocks in the running game, and making those kinds of mistakes. And so I would look for a veteran like Justin Jones on the Bears defensive line on the interior there to win some of those pass rush reps against the rookie left guard Kenyon Green, the backup center David Quessenberry. Also a big fan of the Bears' backup three technique, Armon Watts, who I think has had some good pass rush reps this season. And we've seen the Bears show a propensity in passing situations to put a third defensive end in at that defensive tackle position. We've seen Travis Gibson do it. We've seen Dominic Robinson do it. I think Al-Qadim Muhammad has done it a couple times too. And I think the Bears can really get that pressure up the middle because the strength of this Texans offensive line is the tackles. Laramie Tunzel, they traded all the draft picks for left tackle. And then a couple years ago, they used a first-round pick on Titus Howard, who's been pretty good for them when they've needed him to. So the interior is where I think the Bears can win that pass rush matchup and also get some of that penetration in the ground game, although I think the Texans feel a little bit more confident about what those guys are able to offer there. We've already mentioned the Jalen Johnson, Brandon Cooks matchup. I think it should be a shadow coverage situation there. Cooks is fast, can go deep on you vertical, and I'd like as much Jalen Johnson as possible win there. If the Bears don't do that, I think it'll be a good test for Kindle Vildor and Kyler Gordon. I'm curious to see how a guy like Gordon is able to bounce back in a game like this, but Cooks is definitely the wide receiver matchup I'll be looking to watch. And I mentioned earlier, Jerry Hughes is kind of the Bills' top defensive end pass rusher for them, coming over from the Buffalo Bills a couple of seasons ago. And I apologize, I've got a nasty little tickle in my throat right now that is killing me on the podcast. And I know I could feel it coming. I was trying to fight it, and I just can't quite do it. I need some water. Man, usually I'd get those out during the ad breaks or beforehand, so I apologize for the disruption there. But Jerry Hughes is. He plays on both sides of the defensive line for them, so it's not going to be purely a all Braxton Jones or all Larry Borum matchup, but especially I think week one for them against the Indianapolis Colts. He got a couple of sacks in that game and got it for the quarterback a few times. Denver did a better job of kind of focusing in on him in their pass blocking and limited some of the damage he could do there, but I think he clearly, to me, is the biggest threat of the group up front. They did get some good production last week from a young guy, Rasheem Green, that, to be honest with you, I'm not super familiar with. But Hughes has been a 10-sack guy earlier in his career in Buffalo, but he's 34 now, I think. And so, he's not the spry young pass rusher that he once was, but he's definitely still a very sound technique-wise and can beat you in a lot of different ways. And I think it'll be another decent test for Borum and Jones. Maybe not like Rashawn Gary, Nick Bosa level test, but still definitely the guy to keep an eye on there. And I'm curious, the Bears have been so focused on leaving tight ends into chip and block and running backs into block these first two games against two very good defensive lines. And I don't mean to besmirch or slander the Texans defensive line, but I just don't think it's Packers and 49ers level defensive line and pass rush. And so I wonder if the Bears then will be able to do more five-man protections, get more receivers in routes, and also be able to open up the passing game a little bit more that way, because they might not have to be as overwhelmingly focused on helping the offensive line and slowing the pass rush, and maybe they can count on their offensive linemen to have a little bit more one-on-one success against opposing defensive linemen. Raise your hand if you've heard of any of these players not named Jerry Hughes. Jonathan Greenard, Roy Lopez. That sounds like a made-up Madden name of just like create a player in the generic draft class. I already mentioned Rasheem Green. Can't say I know much about him. I know Malik Collins, their defensive tackle, interior pass rush guy. Like, he and Jerry Hughes are kind of the two names that you might know. But then they did sign Ogbania Okonkwo from the Rams. He was a recent draft pick. I've kind of heard of him. But right, this is not a defensive line of premier, household name talent. That doesn't mean they're not good. That doesn't mean they can't have flashes. That doesn't mean they can't be disruptive if the Bears' offensive line struggles. But it just feels like a different tier than Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark, or Nick Bosa and the rest of that, and Javon Kinlaw and Armstead and the rest of that 49ers defensive line as well. So potentially some better options there. But Hughes is the guy you want to watch matchup-wise. And then for the Bears' offense and their weapons, I'm curious about Darnell Mooney versus Derek Stingley Jr., the other first-round pick for the Texans this season out of LSU. He didn't play much at all the college season last year with a Liz Frank injury, so he's been out of football for a full year plus, getting just back in this season. And he struggled with Cortland Sutton last week a lot one-on-one, and I feel like Darnell Mooney can win that matchup when he does get that opportunity. And as we talked about, trying to get those seams going vertical, and I think that's the kind of one-on-one that I would like to see Mooney beat him at the line of scrimmage and then win deep. We've seen Mooney be capable of that, and if you're going against a rookie that you feel like you can pull a fast one on here or there, I think it matchup-wise should work pretty well. I do really like their slot cornerback Desmond King, the former Iowa cornerback who played some safety as well in his career and has kind of had some injury problems early in Los Angeles with the Chargers, and I think he was traded to the Titans a little while ago, and then signed with the Texans last year, I think. And I like Desmond King. I think he's a smart, talented, but more like an off-zone type player, and I don't like him as much in man-to-man coverage. So I think, again, there can be some potential opportunity there with his back to the quarterback. He's always seemed like an eyes-on-the-quarterback type guy. You thought he would fit better in a Lovie Smith-like zone, but they've been playing a lot more man and single-deep kind of coverages. So I think the Bears have some real opportunities here. And if they can win those matchups, right, Mooney needs to beat Stingley, and then Braxton Jones and Larry Borom need to hold on to Jerry Hughes, not penalty holding, but hold down, limit the production of Hughes, and I think the Bears' offense can then get going. And on the other side, like we said, if Jalen Johnson can kind of keep Brandon Cooks under wraps, I think the Bears should be fine that way, and especially if Justin Jones and Armon Watts can get that interior pressure against a rookie left guard in Kenyon Green and a backup center in David Quessenberry, there's a formula here for the Bears to feel pretty good about this game. Again, we talked, like yesterday on the crossover podcast, I gave a 17-10 final score prediction. I just don't think the Bears are going to put up 35 points in this one, but I don't think the Texans are either, and I think it'll be fairly low scoring, but the Bears should be able to handle this one and feel a little bit more back on track after things fell apart last week against the Green Bay Packers. Whatever happens in the game on Sunday, you can be sure we're going to break it all down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast, so make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, check out Locked On Texans with John Hickman and Cody Davis. Those are good dudes. The Senior Bowl last year, I was hanging out with John in person. We got all the Locked On folks around there, and man, John's a good guy. We just hung out we got a big house, and we were all just chilling, and he's a genuinely good human being, and they know they're Houston Texans. So if you want that scoop, you want to learn a little more about this Bears opponent, go check out Locked On Texans. Come on back on Monday for Locked On Bears, and of course, come on back for your next opportunity to bear down.